Welcome to Bear Tracks, the official podcast for Butler Community College. In each episode, we feature inspirational and lively conversations with our graduates about their memories of student days, stories, challenges, and career highlights. We have so many alumni who are leading change and innovation in their respective fields around the world. And whether you're a recent graduate or a seasoned professional, we hope you'll find inspiration and new perspectives through the conversations we have on this show. Thank you so much for joining us and enjoy the episode. Today on Bear Tracks, I am excited to have on the podcast Ryan Howey, another former Butler student. Ryan's joining us from Abu Dhabi, where he serves as the Deputy Director of Laboratory Services for the Medical Bureau of the U.S. State Department. And we're so excited to be doing this across the world podcast. Ryan, welcome to Bear Tracks.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
I'm glad we could make this work. Obviously, we have a significant time difference, and I think this is the wonders of the internet these days and the amazing thing about podcasting that I've learned over the years that I've been doing it. You can connect with anybody around the world, and so this is a great example of us doing that. So I'd like for you to start by telling me kind of what was your path to Butler as a student, and why did you choose Butler when you were choosing to be a Grizzly?
Sure, that's a good question. So I would say that I had a lot of extracurricular activities when I was in high school that didn't include positive things like sports. And so I wound up dropping out of high school. But it wasn't very long after I dropped out that I realized I didn't want to cook fries for the rest of my life. And so I needed to make a start. And what I learned at the time was that you can't just go to a university without ACT scores and all these things. And I wasn't prepared for any of that stuff. So I was just like, okay, let's go check out Butler County. And of course, there were placement exams and stuff, but I was able to walk in and basically start classes, which is what I needed.
Did you find that maybe bridging that gap between your, we'll say, extracurricular activities, like you said, from high school to Butler was a positive experience? Was it something that you needed a lot of help with, or were you a self-guided student?
My experience, I think when I finally got back into college at Butler, I was maybe 21 and 22. And I think my first couple semesters was really eye-opening in terms of like what I'd missed. I was just kind of blown away by what I didn't know, the tricks of being a student that I'd never practiced. Mm-hmm. And so I think it was a steep learning curve just initially on like my, like sort of my expectations for how much work I was going to need to put in. But in reality, I think I got adjusted pretty quickly, really quicker than I would have certainly had I gone to a different college or a big university. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the strengths of Butler, the small class sizes, the attention that students can get. Did you experience that too?
Yeah, actually, so a little more about my high school days is I went to an alternative high school in Wichita, Metro Boulevard. One of my teachers at Metro in the interim years from when I dropped out to when I started going to BCCC, she became a teacher there. So it was like my first week, I like run into a teacher I knew and loved. It was like one of those small world, small college things. I mean, it was really great for me to like already have friends right there, people who could help me navigate stuff. It was a good thing.
That's amazing. The Butler family, as we call it. And it never goes away, no matter what. No matter how far you run, if you try to go to Abu Dhabi, we'll still get you part of the family. You've kind of talked about your challenges before going to Butler. Did you have any while you were a student beyond just adjusting to the classes and anything like that? Or was it mostly just getting yourself into that student mindset?
One story I actually really like to tell, I don't know if this is maybe the best story for your podcast or not, but I had to take placement exams, right? Because I was a dropout and I didn't have, I had a GED, but that was it. So I go in there and the lady was like, so what's the last math class you took? And I was just kind of going through in my head. I was like, well, when I was a freshman, before I was crazy, I was in advanced placement, algebra, geometry, whatever. And then, then when I went to the bad kids school, I took like algebra 1 for 3 years and then I got kicked out twice and never went back. And that was exactly what I told her. And she just started laughing just like you did. And I was like, I'm not joking. No, I was like, that's really, that's where I'm coming from. And she was like, oh, But that was just a funny situation that I maybe they don't see very often in that office. But really, like Butler was, for me, the scheduling was easy because I worked full time. I had a life that I had to like schedule classes around it, and I managed to make it work really pretty easily. I lived on the east side of Wichita, so it was nice also that I could just like zip over to Andover, and there was like a lot less traffic back then.
Yeah, that's not the case so much now. Although compared to a lot of places, we won't complain about our traffic in Wichita.
I've lived all over the world at this point, and everywhere you go, the traffic is always the worst there. You know what I mean? Because there's always something about it that makes it super obnoxious, and Wichita's
Yeah.
not immune.
Everybody thinks that theirs is a special kind of bad.
Oh, it is. Everybody does have a special kind of bad. I believe that for sure.
That's funny. You're describing kind of what Butler does by meeting students where they're at and helping conform college to their working and living lifestyle, because we have a lot of non-traditional students, which is what you would have been technically, and they are balancing family, they are balancing work with going back to school or starting school for the first time. And I think it's a really important piece of what we do and why we succeed with so many kinds of students rather than people who do go into four-year universities unprepared and just not, like you said, you just weren't aware of what kind of level of work was required of you. Let's talk a little bit about your success beyond Butler, because you've had a very interesting career trajectory since your time with us as a Grizzly. How do you feel your education prepared you for the first part of your work, which was, I believe, laboratory work?
Yeah. Okay. So, kind of my story is that around the time I went back to college, I got a job in the laboratory at Via Christi. And so I was sort of already in the laboratory world trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And then it was, okay, I'll just take some classes to figure out what I like. And as I took science classes and became familiar with what would be required to get into, at the time, the degree was called medical technology. That's what they called the program back then. Now they call it clinical laboratory science. Anyway, as I became familiar with what was required for a clinical laboratory science degree, I became more focused on those classes. And I think the atmosphere at Butler was able to help me become more relaxed in those laboratory settings where I could really explore and figure out what it was that I liked about it or what I didn't like about it and that sort of thing. It was a mix of, do I know what I want to do? What am I capable of doing? What's going to be like a productive degree to get? And I think the classes at Butler and my work experience at the time all kind of met in the middle and helped me like just kind of walk right into this role, like ride this degree till the wheels fall off. It's just taken me so many places. And it was all sort of by chance that I happened to get a job in a lab and happened to start taking science classes and,
Was there a particular professor maybe that influenced you significantly, or was it just kind of once you got into it, you were like, oh, yes, this is what I want to do?
I had an English professor that I just loved. And I can't remember the guy's name. Of course, that would be too easy. I think his whole vibe was that like he had taught at a big university and was retiring to the Wichita area or something. He just wanted some small time classes to teach, but we got the benefit of all his years of, I mean, the guy was just a super interesting character and his lectures were really entertaining for me. I think some of the younger students maybe didn't enjoy him as much, but I thought, oh, this dude's hilarious. So
were you mostly in class with other students?
Yeah, I didn't do any online classes back then, I don't think.
What was that experience like as a non-traditional student?
I liked it mostly because I had never really participated in that kind of thing before. So it was all kind of new and exciting. I think coming at it with a renewed motivation that I had never had before made it more rewarding. And probably the small class sizes helped with that. The teachers could notice. I would always sit in the front row. And I remember I used to get pretty annoyed because there would be high school kids who would be taking like college level classes and they would be like all faster than me with all the questions. And I would just be like, God, this sucks. These kids.
But in the end, you found that it didn't really matter, that you were there doing your thing, right?
I mean, of course. And you're not competing with other students, right? You're competing basically against yourself. And so everybody came out ahead.
What have you taken with you from your experience at Butler in the community college environment through your varied career from Wichita all the way to the United Arab Emirates and everywhere in between?
I think for me, because I came to Butler from this place of like, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I should do it. I don't know if this is going to work for me, blah, 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 with all that kind of baggage. I think coming out of Butler, and on to a university with really coasting on a lot of success in classes there, just gave me sort of the ability to take this stance of, I don't care if it's hard. I can try and I'll probably be fine. I think I can handle just about anything. And it wasn't just Butler that did that, but it was Butler that kind of gave me the academic confidence that I really never, ever had. Never wanted to have, but I didn't have that before Butler for sure.
That's lovely. What has been your favorite place to live and work so far?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I have these regions. I work at an embassy that's sort of a central to a region. And then I have, like when I was in China, I had 18 different embassies that I served, embassies and consulates. And when I was in West Africa, I had like 22, I think, different embassies and consulates. So there's things about living places that I enjoyed. China was great. All the things that you want to be cheap were cheap, like the food and the transportation. But it was a really crowded place. The language is really, really difficult. So there's things I like and dislike. But I'll tell you, of all the places I've been to, Mongolia is like my favorite. There's just so much about Mongolia that's cool. I feel like every country had their 15 minutes of ruling the world, like the UK ruled the world for a while, like Rome did, Mongolia did. They were one of the first really like globally dominant cultures. And they're like really kind of in this far corner of Asia now. They're just really proud, and they may not be like a really rich country, but everything they have, they really take care of and stuff. And they're just so nice. For a country that has so little, they're just so welcoming and generous. I just loved everything about it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'll add it to my list of, potential travel.
I'm telling you, man. And nobody knows about it either. So you can go there. The most expensive part's getting there. The hotels are cheap and you'll have a blast, I promise.
Those are always the best places.
Yeah.
What are your future career goals as of right now? You've kind of touched on a lot of the things you've done, but do you have anything you're sort of striving for?
Well, this job at the State Department for a long time was just like a dream job. I had heard about it when I was back in Wichita, and a guy was actually trying to talk me out of getting a degree in hospital clinical laboratory science, because he was like, you're going to work in weekends and hospital basements and holidays forever. He's like, don't do it. He was like, you want a cool job in a laboratory, you can work at an embassy. So anyway, I've had this job has been my dream job forever. And now that I have it, and I found out that it's like, there's challenges, right? But it's manageable. But the nice thing, and this will be my plug for the State Department, is that the State Department has lots of different opportunities for advancement. And it's nice that the State Department has this program where they pay for you to get a leadership certificate from Harvard. Like in your spare time, you do some assignments and then you travel to Boston for a couple weeks, 3-4 weeks out of the year. And at the end of the year, you get this certificate from Harvard. So like, I think that's kind of what I want to do next, because this job it's really, I can't see myself leaving it. There's so many good things about it.
That's great. I think it's important to share that you can go from Wichita, Kansas to anywhere. Sometimes maybe high school graduates, maybe they don't think about that. And I wouldn't have either when I was 18 or even when I was 21, but you don't have to feel limited to where you are. And that Butler is a place that can help launch you into those kinds of things is awesome.
It's totally true. I am literally coming from a background of I was cooking pizza. I did not have any college experience. And now I'm a diplomat. I wear suit and ties and go to embassies, and I meet with public figures. It's pretty amazing. And that road from dropout to diplomat, Butler County was one of the first steps. So I firmly believe anybody sitting around questioning, oh, what can I do with my life? I've made mistakes, whatever. You can shrug all that stuff off. And there's so many routes to get out of that.
We've touched on this a little bit in this exact conversation right now. What do you feel about the perception of community college? Do you think that it's changed over the years because you're coming at it from a different student viewpoint? Have you been aware of what the perception of community college is? What do you think are the biggest misconceptions about it?
For me, at the time that I needed to start going back to school, the idea of like educational prestige, or that a degree from one place or another place means more. For me, it was like, what, it's just a piece of paper. Like, who cares where you get it? The work's the same. Like, there's standards. So why pay more? I mean, and that was my perception. And I don't know if other people saw it that way or not, but I would challenge anybody to say that a community college degree isn't worth as much. I got as much out of it as I would have got somewhere else, and in some ways I got more. So I just never really cared that much about the perceptions of other people. But I think now on this side of it, I would challenge anybody who tried to tell me that it's not worthwhile or you get more out of it somewhere else.
Well, to your point about your English instructor, he had been a university instructor. We have standards that they have to meet to be an instructor at Butler. So you're still getting the same level of commitment from teachers. You're just getting a little more personalized attention.
Right, exactly. And sometimes it's the exact same teachers, but in a smaller classroom. So it's way more bang for your buck.
Yeah, I think people maybe don't realize that they can do both. The instructors usually are probably, especially if they're an adjunct part-time instructor, they're probably teaching at another school as well. So I think it's important to highlight that for sure. All right, I'm off the cuff here. What's one of the most interesting stories from your career so far?
I have one story I like to tell. It was a couple years ago when I was living in Senegal. Dakar is the capital of Senegal, West Africa. So part of my job is to visit these local laboratory resources and check on their quality to make sure that we're referring American diplomats to appropriate facilities. And when I got to Senegal, it was mid-COVID, early 2021, and there was this research facility that started doing all this COVID testing. And they weren't doing a lot of testing previously. And I was like, well, that seems strange. I want to go visit this place. And they wouldn't let me go to the facility without meeting the director. And I tried to get out of it. I was like, I don't really need to meet the CEO. Like, come on, can I just meet him? And then they were like, no, you need to meet Professor Mboop. And so I run the name by the people at the health unit. I'm like, who is this Professor Boop? And they're like, oh, you're going to go meet Prof? You have to. They were like, you need to wear a suit. Like, don't mess this up. And then also it was like, can we go with you? Because I want to meet him too. It was like this really funny thing. So then I had to go do some research. And it turns out this guy is the African Dr. Fauci. He helped write the book, HIV in Africa. He worked with these Harvard physicians all through the 80s and 90s doing all this fantastic research. And he's widely known as he's like the guy in terms of laboratory quality in Africa. He's just so well known. And I found out why when I got to meet him. He was just so gracious and welcoming. He was very cool. And then I got to talk about COVID with him and how was it that Africa fared so well when all these other countries did so poorly. And spoiler alert, he didn't have any great wisdom. He was just as baffled and surprised. I mean, happily baffled, like they have enough problems. But yeah, it was just really cool that I got to meet that guy, and I'll never forget it. The most famous laboratorian in Africa, known throughout the continent, and I got to sit in his office, shake his hand. It was great.
Yeah, we have literary heroes and we have scientific heroes, and that was one of your now scientific heroes.
Yeah, that's the funny thing about this job is I didn't even know I was going to have to meet somebody like this. And here I am, like, I'm going to remember it for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So my other favorite story, similar to that one, I was on duty in Mongolia. I was just there for a week. Part of my duties, like I said, I'm going to these local facilities, making sure they're doing appropriate lab work for our patients. And one of the things about it, depending on what country you're in, to apply for a US visa, they want you to get like TB tested and some other things. And so the consular department, the people who issue the visas, wanted me to help them survey the National Tuberculosis Testing Laboratory in Mongolia. And I'm like, cool, let's go. This is like my bread and butter and I love it. So we're going, and Mongolia, it's a developing country, right? So it has some nice parts of town, and then it has some like older parts of town. And then a lot of their infrastructure was built by Russia in the 50s and 60s, and maybe has not been updated since. And so we pull up to this National Tuberculosis Laboratory, and it's in this very brutal looking communist era building, crumbling parking lot, dirt road outside. And I'm like, what am I walking into? Like, I was legitimately like, I wasn't afraid for safety. I was just like, I didn't have the highest expectations for this place. And I went in there, and they had the cleanest lab everything was so well squared away. They would have put any US lab a run for their money. They really were doing a great job. And what was so fun about it for me was because there's always translation, right? And the people who are translating for me aren't necessarily even healthcare practitioners. So there's things that just get lost, and I'm aware of that. So I try to be really clear. But some things that just have to go unsaid because I can't say them and I don't trust other people to say them. So anyway, I'm in this Mongolia laboratory and I'm like, can I look at your microscope? There's a specific method where you use fluorescent dyes to stain these bacteria and you want to see them glowing on the microscope. And I'm like, if they aren't making these slides right, that's a deal breaker. So I was like, can I see? And I sit down at the microscope and I dial it in and I find the sample on the slide. And I'm like, oh, this looks great. And they were like blown away. They were like, oh, this guy's a laboratorian. And you could see the like delight on their face because they just thought I was some suit from the embassy that didn't know what I was doing.
Sure.
And so it was just like immediately like part of the laboratory family. And that kind of stuff just kind of like crosses borders because, you have the same challenges at work if you're in Mongolia or if you're in Bogota or wherever. So it was just like, that was a really cool experience. And it helped me like gain this huge respect for Mongolians that you can be in a country that doesn't have much and really still do really great work, take really good care of people. I mean, they really value what they do have, and I appreciate that. I try to carry that with me and remember, it doesn't matter. Things don't need to be brand new to be shiny and work well. Yeah.
For sure. You're making me think that you're like a scientific James Bond. I just have this image of you going into this dilapidated looking thing, but it's actually really high tech. And, Q is there with the microscope like, hey, come look at this, Ryan. Like, that's just so cool.
That Mongolia lab, I mean, by all rights, I was like, this building looks like it's about to fall apart. But when you go inside, it was like everything that they had the ability to maintain well, they did. And the whole place was just so squeaky clean, and it was just great.
That's amazing. Love it. Well, I think we're ready to wrap up here. So is there anything more you'd like to share advice for people looking to go to college or just anything else you want to say about Butler in general?
Go Grizzlies. Honestly, I think what I want to say is that I'm just this kid from Kansas. I come from the minimum wage working world, and I would never in a million years have thought that I'd be working overseas for the government with a top security clearance, meeting with other countries' officials and stuff. And I just want to reinforce for anybody who's doubting it that it's possible for anybody, that you can do it. In fact, the State Department prides itself on not having an educational requirement for a generalist diplomat. Anybody can do this. And if you are the kind of person who can walk into a class at Butler and work hard and get your grades and get your degree, you can absolutely do what I'm doing without a doubt.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you so much for your time, for joining us from across the seas, and for inspiring current, future Grizzlies.
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been really great getting to know you guys and getting to think back about my time at Butler County. I really appreciate the opportunity, and please let me know if I can help anymore.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Bear Tracks, the official podcast of Butler Community College. We hope you found the conversation as entertaining and enlightening as we did. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform, and don't forget to visit our website or email us at beartrackspodcast@butlercc.edu for more resources and opportunities to connect. Thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to bringing you more thought-provoking conversations on the next episode of Bear Tracks.